A shocking 180, even for a president who is known for them. I'm Kaitlan, and this is The Source. Good evening from New York, where President Trump today stunned the United Nations with what was, even for him, a blistering address, mocking the UN itself, questioning whether the United Nations should even exist, and also telling world leaders who were his audience inside that room today, quote, "Your countries are going to hell." But he left his most stunning declaration for actually after all of that. In a Truth Social post that came a few hours later and that Ukraine's president is hailing as a big shift, the president appears to have done a 180, switching his position from Ukraine has no cards and will have to give up land to President Putin to Zelensky and his allies are in a position to win all of Ukraine back in its original form. The most immediate question, of course, is what prompted this? This evening, President Zelensky, for his part, said that the move even surprised him.
Are you surprised to hear that?
A little bit. A little bit. I mean, this. I'm sure in my people, in my army, and I'm sure in strengthening of the in support of the United States. But President Trump was more positive in it, and he showed that he wants to support Ukraine to the very end. It was a little bit surprise for me. You're right. I was very positive signals from the side that Trump and America will be with us to the end of the war. Yes, we will see.
Yeah.
Right? We will see, but God bless, it will be so.
Clearly a good day for President Zelensky. And for the American president, there are a few things that he could have said that would have been more of a change than what we all witnessed inside the Oval Office alongside his Ukrainian counterpart just 7 months ago.
You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
The difference between that moment and now is nothing short of remarkable. It comes after a failed meeting with President Putin in Alaska and a battlefield that has remained a slog, with the president today acknowledging that he doesn't have the pull with Putin that he once thought he did.
I thought that was going to be the easiest one because of my relationship with Putin, but unfortunately that relationship didn't mean anything, unfortunately.
The president's call for Ukraine to continue its fight and an openness to a definitive victory on the battlefield not only runs counter to what his administration has been saying, it's not the same position that we heard from his Secretary of State earlier at the United Nations and what he was essentially arguing about the future of this.
A war that cannot end militarily. It will end at a negotiating table. That's where this war will end. Very generous offers have been made. For example, a ceasefire at the current lines of contact, while all the other details on the future of the conflict could be worked out in terms of future territorial lines.
Also tonight, when it comes to the question of Russian drones violating the airspace of our NATO allies, compare what the president said just about 2 weeks ago to his response on that same question today.
What's your reaction to Russian drone incursion into Poland?
Could have been a mistake. Could have been a mistake.
Do you think that NATO countries should shoot down Russian aircraft if they enter their airspace?
Yes, I do.
A quick answer from the president there. When he was pressed further on this question, this is what he said 2 minutes later.
Would you back up NATO allies? You said that you thought that they should shoot down the Russian aircraft. Would you back them up? Would the United States help them out in some way?
Depends on the circumstance, but, we're very strong toward NATO.
There are a few people who know the region and this president's views on it better than my first source tonight. He is the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and represented the Trump administration there during his first term. Ambassador Bill Taylor, it's great to have you back here on The Source, especially on a day like this. And just, I can only imagine what your reaction was as you read through that Truth Social post today. President Zelensky is describing it as a game changer. Is that how you see it?
It is, Caitlin. It is a demonstration that the president has finally figured out that Putin is the problem, that Zelensky represents a nation that shares our values, that we want to support in our own interest as well as the European interest, as well as Ukrainian interest. So this is a very good sign, a good move. It's not totally out of the blue. That is, it's been going in this direction for the last several months. You pointed out the nadir 9 months ago, but since then it's been on the way up, and this is a good indication of where I think the president has gotten to be.
Do you think this has anything to do with what's actually playing out on the battlefield in Ukraine, or do you think this more has to do with what we've heard or what we have not seen from President Putin following that summit in Alaska?
On the battlefield, Putin is not winning. On the battlefield, the Ukrainians are holding off the Russian army. Yes, the Russian army is taking a little bit here, a little bit there, but at incredible cost. Caitlin, I mean, you've reported it's 1 million Russian soldiers either killed or taken off the battlefield from wounds. This is horrible for the Russians. The Russians are not winning, and if this new statement, this recent statement, today's statement by President Trump indicates that he's all in support of Ukraine, then yes, Ukraine can succeed and can prevail, can win, as President Trump has said.
Well, and in terms of that, I mean, from being ambassador to Ukraine, obviously you have to think about President Putin a lot. How do you think the Kremlin is going to respond to this?
President Putin is going to be disappointed, as he should be, as we want him to be.
But do we think he's going to lash out? What do you expect to see from him in terms of striking Ukraine, hitting left. More?
Caitlin, that's what he's doing. I was there last week. I was there for 2 weeks in the beginning of September, up until last week, and that's what he does every night. So he's lashing out at Ukraine. Of course he is. That's what he does. And the Ukrainians continue to grit their teeth and move forward, and this is going to encourage them more, that the Americans are with them. As you quoted President Zelensky exactly right. It demonstrates that the Americans are with them.
When it comes to what's happening here, as all of this is playing out, I mean, Trump was complaining today about how ineffective the United Nations is. What is clear is that actually having these meetings with other world leaders here has kind of proven is, where he's heard a lot of this from, the world leaders he's been speaking with. I believe Secretary of State Marco Rubio is going to meet with Sergei Lavrov here in New York tomorrow. I mean, that conversation just got a lot more fascinating following this post.
A lot more fascinating, and Secretary Rubio, if nothing else, takes his cues from the president, and the president has been very clear today. So I imagine that Secretary Rubio is going to be also very clear tomorrow with Lavrov. And again, the message has to be the Russians, to Putin, to Lavrov: you can't win. You're not winning. We are going to support the Ukrainians as long as they need us to prevail. And the Europeans are there too. The Ukrainians have demonstrated great bravery and great courage and great persistence in fighting for this. So that's the message for Lavrov tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll see what Lavrov's response is. Ambassador Bill Taylor, it's always great to have you here. Thank you for joining tonight. And also joining me is our next best source on this, the New York Times White House and national security correspondent David Sanger, who is the author of New Cold Wars, China's Rise, Russia's Invasion, and America's Struggle to Defend the West. And David, I think, just going off of what the ambassador was saying there, one question is this position a firm position by President Trump, who has, for months said that, just weeks ago was saying that Zelensky's going to have to give up land to end this war. Now he's saying maybe they can get all of it back.
Well, Kaitlan, I don't think there's any such thing as a permanent position or even a consistent position on some of these big foreign policy issues inside the Trump White House. We've just seen too many iterations, too many changes over the time. I think as Ambassador Taylor had it just right. It took the president a long time to get here. But let's not overemphasize how fully in the president is, because he did not say that the United States would restore the kind of military aid that the U.S. was providing for the first 3 years, and that J.D. Vance and others campaigned as a big mistake. He said that we would continue to sell arms to the Europeans, and they, through NATO, can give them to the Ukrainians as they want. But he sort of stepped back, and at the end of his post, he said, you know, I wish you both well, you know, as you go fight it out. So there's some concern among the Europeans here, and you may have picked up some of this today at the UN as well, that the president is sort of backing off, washing his hands of this, and then maybe setting himself up to go to the Russians and begin to try to reopen diplomatic and trade relations, which he's long said he wants to go do.
Well, I mean, and he was going on at length about Russia's economy today and saying when the Russian people realize what is happening here. I mean, he even called Russia, he said they're just a paper tiger, basically. That is a pretty shockingly different position than when he was telling Zelensky, you don't have any cards here.
It's a shockingly different position from the one he was taking a few weeks ago when he said Zelensky's got no choice but to negotiate. He got into a war with a larger nuclear power. Well, he didn't get into the war, he got invaded by a larger nuclear power. Much as the president may want to taunt President Putin by calling him a paper tiger, the Russians still do have the world's largest nuclear arsenal. And at various moments in this conflict, they've threatened to use tactical nuclear weapons, or at least suggested they might turn to that. They still have the ability to field a much larger army than the Ukrainians do. Ambassador Taylor had it just right. They're not winning, but they're also not losing.
Well, and in terms of that, you know, the question for NATO allies is, Trump today answered so quickly when a reporter said, should they shoot down Russian aircraft that come into their airspace? Is, you know, he was just saying not that long ago, maybe it was a mistake. The Polish deputy prime minister responded and tweeted Roger that earlier today in response to what Trump said. The question is, NATO allies shoot down a Russian drone, what happens after that? And is the United States backing them up on that?
If they shoot down drones, as they did over Poland, that's one thing. If they shoot down a manned aircraft, which is what was flying over Estonia, that's another thing, right? I mean, we shoot down drones, you know, all the time. Nobody gets hurt usually, and that's not that big a deal. A manned aircraft would be a big deal over NATO territory. And all of a sudden, if you've then got a crisis, right? A NATO ally under the command of a U.S. commander who runs all of NATO has then shot down a manned Russian aircraft, and the Russians could decide to escalate. One would hope that this is something the administration is beginning to game out and think about what their responses would be.
Have you heard anything? I mean, you're one of the best sourced reporters in this space. Have you heard anything about why Trump posted this today, where this came from?
You know,
he didn't mention it in his speech. It's not like he came out and it was like going to be a tenet of his speech to the United Nations today.
This is the strange thing. He was supposed to speak for 14 minutes. He spoke for 56, something like that. He went on many topics, including his anger that as a real estate developer, he didn't get the contract to redo the United Nations. He did not speak about Russia and Ukraine, the central issue that has animated national security professionals around the world, and certainly around the West, for 3.5 years now. And then he turns out this Truth Social. You know, he's sort of gone from one extreme to the other. At one point, as you showed on the tape, he said, you don't have the cards. Well, obviously, the Ukrainians have some cards. They're making 3.5 million drones a year now and scoring some big victories. At this other end today, he says, you can win. Well, I'm not entirely sure what has changed on the battlefield. That is because they have not been able to go take that territory for the past 3.5 years.
And also, does that include Crimea? Is that what he's talking about when he says original? Go back to everything. Obviously, that would be back to 2014. David Sanger, we will see what happens here and if this position holds. Thank you so much for that reporting.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Great to have you and the ambassador. Up next here, another story that has been dominating the headlines of the last week. Jimmy Kimmel is back in his studio. The audience is now there. He returns to late night in just a couple of hours. The big question is what he will say. We're live outside the studio. We have new reporting on what that monologue is going to look like. That's next.